No, I think it was. I think it's maybe been a recentering of a focus. I think that as times changed and as things evolved, it became not so much issue driven, but more purpose driven with truth and reconciliation. And I think if anything can be said, it may perhaps went in that direction.
Very on point. I think there are quite a few items within this unit that speak to that, like how did not updating our principles then did us now at that level.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dana. I think that our not updating our principles in 2009 when they were due to be updated at the 15-year mark had a very significant consequence for the denomination. The principles, of course, are just so beautiful and they cover so much. As after 1985, for the analysis that I've done on resolutions for international human rights and justice, the principles ground the entire resolution and the wording of the resolution. And because we didn't update the principles, I would say we just became, I think, a little more stagnant. From my group of concerns, I started to notice a precipitous decline in resolutions that focus on international human rights and justice concerns, starting in the 1990s and continuing. And the world changed pretty drastically. China became a member of the World Trade Organization in 1993. That was very, very significant. It changed the world in ways that only gradually played itself out. But with China entering the World Trade Organization and the passage of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the world and what was happening south of the United States border, those conflicts became a lot less severe and eventually resolved. And we didn't have nuclear proliferation concerns that we had in the 70s and 80s during the height of the Cold War.
Mhm.
Um, so I just think that not passing our principles kept us a little more static. The principles were so beautiful, but it maybe made us a little bit more reluctant to kind of being open to a prophetic movement and to where we wound up. I mean, thank love that we did have the widening circle of concern report with the committee that produced that. And there were these horrible institutional crises in Unitarian Universalism in 2014 and 2016 with the implosion that we did have at Starr King School for the Ministry and with the resignation of President Peter Morales. I think our not updating our principles were key factors, key influencers, and
Mm.
probably made those conflicts a lot more acute than maybe what they otherwise could have been. If we as a denomination had maybe had a little more foresight and maybe kept the principles but enhanced them a little bit more and positioned ourselves a little bit better than what we were.
Definitely. I'm looking at the account of General Assembly 2009. And so when they go into this discussion about the principles, this says the business of the Saturday afternoon plenary session was voting on whether to place the changes proposed in the Article 2 of the UUA bylaws, known as the principles, on the agenda for adoption. A number of delegates spoke to the meeting, both for and against sending the measure forward. There were three primary arguments against proceeding with the changes as currently proposed. One, some speakers argued that the existing principles ain't broke, don't fix them, or no change to the existing language. Mm. Two, others
Uh-huh.
recognized the need for change, but thought that together we can do better. That is, they would like to have an opportunity to further revise the proposed language. And then three, a third group advocated that we save our sources, accepting the proposed new language, honoring Unitarian and Universalism as primary sources, but also wishing to retain the existing language which specifies and celebrates inspiration from other sources such as Judaism, humanism, and earth-centered traditions. And there's one more piece that I want to note about this and read about this. It says, those in favor of advancing the proposed changes for consideration primarily argued that these changes can and should be made at this time to improve our understanding of ourselves. A members of the General Assembly Youth Caucus, or a member of the Youth Caucus speaking in favor of the proposed changes said, we'll take the 2 steps forward over the half step back that this represents. And that's significant for me because, again, this is a youth voice. I wish this youth voice was credited in this account, just like we have, some other names credited here. But I think that is representative of the ways that we continue to marginalize groups and use ageism in all over the spectrum. Because if this were a reverend somewhere or an elder person, I think your name would be included. So I think that says a lot that even back then, our youth were already saying there's something missing here, and we really need this. And today, what we saw largely in this most recent iteration of updating that Article 2 bylaws and principles and sources was a lot of support from our youth and young adults within congregations. Um, a lot of the youth and young adults were voicing the feeling left out, feeling hurt by the language, feeling like it wasn't representative of them, it wasn't inclusive, it wasn't welcoming. And so again, from my orientation and working with youth and young adults, if my babies are saying ow, like mama bear is coming out and we're
Yeah,
gonna figure
yeah,
this out.
yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely, Dana. And I'm just, I'm excited with the revisions that we passed. By no means do I see them as being infallible or complete, but I think they're so powerful, a witness of what we're going to be about and what we're going to be doing over the next 15 years as we develop our faith. It's extraordinary. And I think it opens up to extraordinary possibility and vision in ways that our now legacy principles, could get us there. But now we need to be led into more of a promised land, going right back to the Hebrew scriptures, of Moses being on the top of the mountain, and he's shown a vision of the promised land, but he's not allowed to go himself. The people will go,
Hmm.
and that's kind of where I see the principles as to having led us in that place of the mountaintop. And the principles will always be there, for that mountaintop. But now it's our time to go forward, into a truly inclusive future. And shame on me for possibly bringing up a topic that could be reminiscent of settler colonial genocide. That is not my intent, and I do acknowledge it. And it just shows that I have my own growing edges that I need to tend to. And but you know, but the but the idea of being led to a new place and to a new journey. And quite honestly, we do need to renew our earth, but we need to renew our earth with all of the people in it and with all of the creatures and all of the blessings. And
Hmm.
and we really do need a promised land that is truly of, by, and for everyone. And so I'm holding on to that. And I think like I say, our principles led us to a precipice, but couldn't get us over the finish line. And that's why we have change.
Hmm. Agreed 100%. And I think that that story of transitioning leadership is so relevant here because in this story, in this piece of religious history, God promised his people the promised land, and he kept his promise to Moses, right? That, well, you will see it, but you cannot enter. And for so many of our leaders and leadership now, right, we are experiencing just that, where we are doing all of the work for a future that we may not be able to see and benefit from and enter. But because we aren't going to be able to step in there, does that mean we just stop? Does it mean that we give up and we don't do it? Absolutely
No way.
not. I mean, I think
Mhm.
that understanding, it gives us this historical, religious, like sacred reference and reminder that our generations will continue to shift and transition. Our leadership will continue to shift and transition. I'm so grateful for my ancestors, who lived through the civil rights era and enslavement. And I often think to myself, even as I struggle today, I think, gosh, could I have survived that? Uh,
Mm.
I often think probably not, because I got a little too much lip as a woman of color. I still say the South is not for me. I am not a Christian founded, like grounded woman. I've got a lot of lip, and I am a woman of color. I don't think I would survive well in the South. I'm grateful for the strength and the follow through and the work that they put forth in these circumstances that seemed insurmountable, like they were never going to change, and where they actively had people saying, no, this is absolutely not what we want. Whereas in the past 50 years, we've lived with this hush hush narrative around that nobody wants to actually acknowledge the truth. And now we're having this resurgence of that vile language that absolutely dishonors the equality of fellow humans, and that each is deserving of that same peace and liberty and pursuit of happiness, justice, and equity that we talk so much about. This story that comes through the ages still rings true today. And I recognize in the work that we are doing work to prepare the next generation to take their seat in leadership. Even as we are just like sliding into and assuming our own,
Yeah,
I feel there's no greater worthy work than to develop leaders for tomorrow. Because I'm already tired, Phyllis. I'm already
yeah,
tired. I want to know that these kids are coming in with the energy, the tools that they need, and to know that they are supported, that they are not fighting against us to make these changes happen, but that they recognize that this is work that we are in together, and we're each navigating the generational aftermath that we've inherited. Um, Lord, Lord, let it be so.
yeah.
Article 2, moving forward, assembly on the proposed covenant for the UUA bylaws. This is 2009, when they were actually discussing updating our principles back then. We see here some of the changes that are summarized, like the
Mhm.
purposes. Current section on purposes is changed to refer to the Association of Free Yet Interdependent Congregations rather than the UUA itself. It
That's an interesting theology. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, building greater relationships. So today we use the language of covenant, but back then we were using language of interdependent congregations. It's very interesting nuance.
And well, that was the hope. They wanted to use Association of Free Yet Interdependent Congregations rather than the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is the association that
Boom.
we came together to create. So we're talking less than 30 years, or is that less than 40, 61? Okay, we're talking less than 50 years since they came together and formed the UUA. And so that's
Mm,
a large scale change that we're talking about, even with language,
I
but it
agree. I
totally
agree.
dismisses like that supporting body. Changes language that
Hmm.
will serve the needs of its member congregations to supports the creation, vitality, and growth of congregations.
There we go.
That
Mhm.
sounds really valid,
That's beautiful. Yep, that
right?
was beautiful.
And I believe that is actually the goal of the Unitarian Universalist Association itself. Um,
Hmm.
let's see, principles. Language of principles remains largely the same with two exceptions. And the fifth principle, which currently reads, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, everything after democratic process is dropped.
Ooh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the
See,
second
there's a good amount of this that I'm not for. The dropping of Unitarian Universalist Association, and like I say, democratic process and dropping everything about it. We need that more than ever. In our congregations and society at large. Look how bad things are now with democracy being under assault. So how prophetic that revision wasn't changed.
Mhm. Absolutely. And could you imagine, like, who would we be as a faith today without that democratic language?
I agree. I agree.
Especially when we're thinking about that 2010 era, when we had a change of leadership in our government.
Hmm.
And we saw a lot of division within our congregations around Republican, Democrats. And I will tell you, in that time, there was a time that my home congregation itself used the language that we are welcoming and accepting of all people, and it's naming all people, right? All orientations and beliefs. And at one point, it said political views. At one
Wow.
point, it actually said regardless of like political party, and
Amazing.
we no longer use that language.
No, no, nope.
Had,
It's impossible to ignore
mhm. It had
given what.
such a big impact. One of the things you mentioned, Phyllis, in a previous video, or I think it might have just been a post for the class, was that you were reading the principles and sources, and you kind of like fell in love again. You're like, how beautiful! And in reading this language, seeing and understanding like how inclusive it was, especially for the time, which was something that I had resonated with and felt for a long time until more recently. So I took the Weave course. That is the curriculum that is designed for congregations to teach our foundational mission on educating to counter oppressions and build just and sustainable communities. And one of the questions that, as we were reading the principles and sources, one thing that was asked was, what is missing from the statements? And I'm thinking, and I'm like, I'm not really seeing much missing because I can, in the language that's presented, see a place where I fit. And I can see where everyone else can fit and can be welcomed in the language. And it wasn't until one of our professors, Shannon Fradiani, had said, yes, and that it doesn't explicitly name the lived experiences of people of color. It doesn't actually include that diversity. It talks about the prophetic voices of the past. We have the language men and women in there because that language was changed previously. But that it didn't expressly name marginalized communities and people. And that became a conversation of its own, right? Like how much is too much, about how can we be the inclusive people that we want to be and still precise and direct in our
Absolutely.
language, right? So we have to have the laundry list. There are points at which it is very important to name the people that you're speaking about and to and for. And then how do we do that without the laundry list or losing out on our supporters when we begin to identify with such specificity instead of saying, no, this applies to absolutely everyone, period.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And the debates over the principles, and the decision not to make amendments, it's pretty clear that this too was an imperfect revised update of the principles. I think we got it much more on target in 2023 and 2024 than what they would have gotten in 2009. But boy, consequences, and we just became just a little bit slower for inclusion. Maybe the world was just changing so fast, and there had been so much change and trauma. The Great Recession was starting, in 2009. The markets had crashed, and maybe our members at that assembly just weren't feeling it. Obviously, they weren't, and they wanted to just hold on to the familiar. I mean, perhaps it comes down to something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw the resistance in the lead up to the 2023 GA and 2021 to 2022. There were still these pockets of resistance, not very large, but they certainly were vocal, and they would just wanted to hold on to that familiar in a very uncertain and changing time. And I do understand the impulse, as much as holding on leads to greater pain. It seems to me for
Mhm.
both others, but ultimately for oneself. And if we can come to terms with that pain and with that trauma, I think we'll be a lot better as a faith community and a
Yeah.
living faith.
Hmm. That holding on to and feeling of loss and like we're losing something, I thought was really interesting. I think it really speaks to our country and society's lack of ability to grieve, right? Not being comfortable with grief and loss, not being able to explore it and appreciate it and fully feel it. We want to put a timeline on it. We expect it to be this linear process, and we are told that that is not the truth, and it's really not the way with anything in our lives, right? Like there are very few things that are
Yep,
linear.
yep, yep.
And what I recognize is that people, especially let's say at our 2023 General Assembly, I had attended in person. I actually took UU Polity at that General Assembly in person. The assembly was asked to center the good of the whole rather than their personal attachments to these principles. And really focus on what it was that we were trying to do. And so many people have come up to the mic with their personal attachments to these principles. And it was clear to me that people believed that they were losing something, that it would be ripped from the textbooks, like the pages would be ripped out of the textbooks. You're not allowed to say it anymore or reference it, and actually forget that this is a part of our history, like a long held tradition that is littered throughout our literature, that is a part of our culture, it's a part of our colloquial like language and how we know each other. These things don't just fall away. Um, and
Mhm.
and that this shift wasn't because we need to remove these principles, but it was because we need to focus our energy and attention on where we can improve and where more work needs to be done. We've had these particular principles for 44 years. And so we've had 44 years to work on them and practice them. And we've done a bang up job, great job. Now you get to move on. Like, let's have a graduation party,
Yeah, it's massive.
right? Like,
Yeah.
we know them well. We've got songs about it. We've got sermons and literature.
Mhm.
So now here's an opportunity to lean into the values that we hold collectively, because I don't think out of love, out of pluralism, justice and equity, generosity, transformation, interdependence, like are we really disagreeing that these are values, right? Out
Yeah.
of those, we have an opportunity to learn more deeply what that means and what that looks like in practice, what it feels like, what that looks and feels like in a community, and what transformative qualities that might have for our future to help us get to where we hope to be and be the people that we say we are and want to be. Doesn't mean we are losing out on anything or even removing what has been so important as a foundation of our UU theology and what we believe. It's just an opportunity to improve and practice more in places that we haven't given as much attention.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Very beautifully said, very powerfully said. And I think we're in this place in 2025 now, with our brand new values. And I was just in a meeting today where leaders said, you know what, we've had to remove equity from our commitment to global inclusion. We're now going to be called global inclusion and diversity, but we're taking equity out because we feel like we have to spend so much time explaining what we mean and that it's a distraction. And so, I am so proud that our faith has one of its values equity, and we need to be clear and strong and proud about what we mean about equity, and that we will not rest until there are equal outcomes for all of the people. In some very certain basic fundamental things, whether it's human rights and justice globally, I think we need to be striving for equity. Whether it's peace and whether it's any of the other things, LGBTQ rights, reproductive rights, it really is about equity, and dignity and equity, so that nobody is denied the potential that they were truly meant to be, so that they can live fully into their inherent worth and dignityness. And that's really what it's all about, I have to say. And if we stick with that and we hang with it and we give for it, and ultimately, as we're called to eventually sacrifice for it and lay down on the line for it, I think we will then be that faith movement that draws people into making from a more salvific world, in which we're called to be doing.
Most definitely. Thank you for that, Phyllis. Truth, Repair, and Reconciliation, an initial review of
Yeah.
Unitarian Universalist Association record, an initial review of the Unitarian Universalist Association record, and this was in response to, at the time, President William Singford's address to the delegates at the 2007 General Assembly. Um, but how does this ring for you? Like, I mean, truth, repair, and reconciliation, when we talk about this on a global scale, and we talk about
Yeah.
apartheid, which we went through in a previous unit, when we talk about also enslavement in Africa, right? Have about the door of no return, the truth and reconciliation panels that were put together to help communities and countries heal from the devastation that they've experienced. Um,
Mhm.
this is something that we are not doing as a country here in America. We see
No.
communities doing at these micro levels in transformative justice and conflict, transformative conflict and repair, but we are not doing this at a larger level that would have a significant impact for so many of our population who are directly impacted by these historical events that continue to cause trauma and carry this generational trauma that we are grieving through. I wonder what comes up for you.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. Yeah, when I look at this genocide, slavery, oppression, President Sinkford asks, "What are our truths? To whom must we be reconciled?" We have many stories to uncover. Only by knowing our truths can we act boldly on our spiritual journeys. What a wonderful statement this is by Dr. Gordon Gibson. And from my take, it's absolutely true that we're not all that much about truth and reconciliation in the United States, and we've known that for a very long time. And I just feel that a key calling of our congregations, in this era in which we're in now, is to model truth and reconciliation in all aspects of our congregational life and in our spiritualities. To be inviting into that deeper conversation of wholeness and repair and liberation. I really feel that that is. The mantra of our time in so many ways, as the world and as the country, just every day that goes by, we come apart at the seams more and more. Um, I just being able to hold a diverse constituency, a truly diverse community and constituency with all of the harms, and being able to lift up that community so that the harms are not the end of the story. So that hope becomes the end of the story, and the harms then become the means by which that transformation happens. That the people can then really be about that prophetic witness in their own lives and as they touch the lives of others. I think that we really are called to do that in our communities today, and that our values are really are drawing us in that direction, and I'm so grateful for it. And I love that we have the widespread spiritualities of universalism to sustain that work. And it's just so important that we don't get too hung up in our historic identities, as important as they may be for some, be they Unitarian, Universalist, or Seven Principles, or whatever else. Those are always going to be with us. But we have to remember, I think, that we're called to the higher purpose of what those identities strove for in the past and what we're called to do in the present.
Mhm.
And truth and reconciliation is just so core to it. And maybe then we'll have greater international human rights and justice, and maybe then the world will truly believe with the set of principles that will set us all free.
Mm. May it be so. I think it's
May
really
it be so.
interesting. I love that note getting caught up on these identities. And I think what's significant about that in this time, in this day and age, is that we have become such a blended people that it's
Mm.
really challenging to hold a singular identity and not acknowledge the other parts of ourselves. Or what are we denying when we are doing that and are hyper focused in one direction or area, and not really acknowledging how this pain and trauma is spread amongst us. um, my head is going to a completely different area, like the movie Origin. They're having dinner together, and one of the characters is talking about slavery versus the Holocaust, and she names that those who were enslaved were meant to be subjugated, while those who were executed in the Holocaust were meant to be executed, and
Yeah, it's so
there's a
evil.
difference,
Yeah,
right? That there was this difference there.
predestination. Hmm.
And it was such a tough tension point of that movie, because I don't think it's an untrue statement, but what it does is disconnect, separate, and divide the shared experience that these two
Yeah.
people and these two nations had, and continue to reel from in very similar ways. And I think it's more important that we understand where we come together on those points, so that we can draw power together to do the healing work that's necessary, rather than continue to keep this divide that says, oh, you're not like me. Because then what are we telling our children who are? What are we telling our children that have both Jewish and African ancestors, both enslaved ancestors and survivors of genocide? What are we saying to them? Which is the same thing I have said about the current wars that we're experiencing in state. We are acting as if there are no people living on this earth that come from both Israeli and Palestinian heritage. Like, come
Yeah,
on, come on. We are
exactly.
blended. So I think that this address was really poignant. And absolutely needed. And I wonder, because of your topic specifically, how do you think we got here to this need for these words specifically, from what you have witnessed globally in the context of what Unitarian Universalism has chosen to raise up and lift up and say that this is important? What do you see represented here in these words that we need truth, repair, and reconciliation for, in our past units?
Gosh, I just the need for truth, repair, and reconciliation when looking at the span of 1962 to the present, it's just so prominent that we've needed it so badly. Um, we were a very powerful nation that was just indifferent to a lot of the sufferings and a lot of the worlds, and thank love that we're part of a denomination that seeks to be open and seeks to have a conscience and seeks to put us on the side of alleviating suffering with the hope that maybe we can then have true relationship, and in that process of having true relationship, maybe we can repair the world, but most especially repair ourselves, and so that we can be people of repair and reconciliation and truth with a small t. And so I definitely think that when I look back at the whole history, and I look back at the topic of international human rights and justice, the needs were so severe through the decades, leading up until about the mid 1990s, when a lot of that severity started to cap. But prior to then, there were just so many severe issues in the area of human rights and justice. Famine in sub-Saharan Africa, the Ethiopian food crisis was just this massive thing. The wars and genocides in Central America, these massive things, nuclear proliferation and propensity to war, and military expenses at the expense of domestic priorities, the overcrowding of urban centers, leading to malnourishment and abuse, the increasing rates. Life for children in the time period from 1962 to the present got worse and not better. Our children have, and that's something, as a parent of a Gen Z person, it's very hard for me to keep that in mind. The lives of our children have gotten progressively worse as each generation has gotten by. Rates of abuse have increased substantially from where they were in previous generations. As hard as that is to even fathom, but it's true. Homelessness and children being hungry. It's the most awful thing. And so these are the humanitarian crises that I've been very, very ensconced in, in my most recent activism, resettling migrants into the local community. And I'm just so grateful that the UUA, going way back, to the late 1960s, started talking about our southern border. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just this incredible thing that we've been seeking to do. And I think we're graced to be a denomination that's one step ahead into the future than I think of many others. And for that reason, we can give voice to things and crises before they happen. And it's just so sad that relatively few people tend to listen, and our government has proven not to listen. But the more we keep to it, the more we tell our story, the more we say what we see happening in the world and suggest what we think it needs, it's going to reach some people. And when those people come together in covenant to bless the world, powerful things can happen far beyond anything that you and I could do individually.
Amen. Amen. Phyllis, I want to share some words from Kit Baki, from her book, Miss Alcott's Email, Yours for Reforms of All Kinds, which is one of the pieces of literature included in this unit. And in this piece, Baki is really moving through time and space, imagining conversations and responses to Alcott. And one thing that she writes that just touches my heart as we close is this. She says, "What I really like about you, and I hope you have learned, and I hope I have learned from you, is that it is worth the trouble to work hard to make your life into something. You have acted in the world as if you matter, as if you can make a difference. In your case, it turned out to be true. You have made a difference." And being with you in this moment, and the work that we continue to do collectively as a faith, as a class, in this class, those words just ring so true. I really like you. You have made such a difference, and I'm so grateful for your work and your time. Thank you.
Yes, likewise, Dana. Well, you take care. Thank you so much for reaching out and getting over the finish line in this challenging but important course. And I'm looking forward to ongoing collaborations. I know you're graduating, and I know you're going to do fantastic things in our faith. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch and just seeing you, flourish into the minister that I know that you're going to be.
Thank you, Phyllis. Phyllis, you mentioned that this unit, 2004 plus, is
Mhm.
really light on the humanitarian focus and needs, unlike some of the other chapters that units that we've gone through.